So, as you know, our project is broadly how do people get ideas for their work, and how does that period of exploratory research work? And we're defining exploratory research as the period that occurs before someone has a clear hypothesis and research design.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, the lead up, you might say, to actual research, and it seems like a relatively under, it's not a well understood area of social science or of science more generally. And in addition to the systematic, fixed response survey that you took, we're conducting a series of interviews with people that allow us to range broadly over this territory. And we're hoping that you'll provide any wisdom that you have. You'll share your experiences. You'll offer anecdotes, stories, that we can draw from in the book and also share with others as an interview and a podcast. So I'm going to ask some questions, but you should feel free to answer them in any way you feel, in any way you like.
Okay.
All right. That's the preface. Now, first question is really about your general approach. Is there a typical approach that you follow in identifying topics for research? What seems to work well for you?
Yeah. So let me just start by saying that I think this is a very interesting project, because I think the initial phase of research is very important, but it's something that often isn't documented particularly well. And it tends to be even less well documented because a lot of times research is published with this by giving the appearance that you have very strong expectations, which are then surprisingly or miraculously met when your theory is confronted with the data.
Right.
I think in my own research, I have started out with general things that I was interested in. It was often based on puzzles. Why do we have these things happening? And then eventually I would try to come up with plausible explanations. And sometimes it was also related to new data coding projects. So if you wanted to try to dig into a particular question, what kind of empirical information might be useful to adjudicate between competing explanations or proto-hypotheses?
Mm-hmm.
Now, later on, when people have started to develop a research portfolio, then the research is often much more cumulative and incremental. So once you've started working in a topic, then there are often natural paper IDs or extensions that suggest themselves as part of one work. But when you move into new research areas, then it's almost more like starting from scratch again. Then you have to think about the motivating questions and the motivating puzzles.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us some examples of those puzzles that intrigued you, that drew you into a new area of research?
Yes, I can give a couple. So I think one of the things that influenced my dissertation research and much of the work that I did later on was the common understanding that events are often influenced by diffusion or dependence between cases. And the near complete absence of this in much of the empirical work, whether that was on democratization or the study of conflict or political mobilization. So seeing those two things next to each other, that led me to think about how might we try to integrate diffusion into models and theories of democratization and conflict. And that had, I think, a big impact on my research agenda.
Mm-hmm.
In other cases, there may be a puzzle in empirical findings and the way that they're commonly presented. So I had always been interested in inequality. And when I started working in the area of conflict, I didn't start out uh, with an interest in political inequality, economic inequality per se. But it was striking that even though we had all these theories suggesting that inequality was very important, most of the empirical work that looked at Gini coefficients and civil war and so on didn't suggest any relationship. So I think there I was interested in seeing how both of these things could be true simultaneously, and that led me to think about group-based inequality and what kind of cleavages may have to exist in order for inequality to play a role.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the observation can come before the theory, but you may draw upon prior work that you've done to try to understand what can account for the observation.
Right. Do you feel that you generally have a pretty good idea of what you're going to find before you actually do the empirical work? Or is it the case that you're not sure what's going to come out?
I think in many cases, you start out working along different lines because you have a good sense that the results are likely to be supportive. I think there are many questions that are interesting, but a lot of times, at least if you're risk averse, it seems easier to work in areas when you think that there will be more direct payoffs, and it's much easier to publish supporting results than it is to publish negative results.
Right.
But I think maybe after I had tenure and after I had more freedom to choose research topics, then it became easier to start working in areas where the questions were interesting, but maybe you didn't have a good sense of exactly what the answer might be or what would come out of it. And so I find that rewarding, but you have to be prepared that it's often more difficult to publish the results.
Is the main obstacle, I'm very interested in this area of what one might call high risk research, where, as you said, one starts out without really knowing where one is going to end up. And I guess the thought that is probably going through most people's heads is, am I going to get some kind of a statistically significant relationship, or is it just going to be noise? Is that what you have in mind?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I ask that because there are other things that can go wrong. So,
sure.
When one thinks about high risk research.
No, yeah. So I don't think it's just about having a sort of significant relationship. It's more a question of whether you think you'll be able to convince people of something, whether it's a contribution, whether it will change their priors. There are some cases we have, especially now with the new emphasis on causal inference, that I think very heavily emphasizes certain types of research design. You could have results that could be quite strong in a traditional frequentist sense, and where people may even believe the explanation, but they would dismiss it out of hand unless you can do something that satisfies expectations that you have some kind of identification strategy, or that you have some kind of inferential approach that they would buy. And I think that therefore the main question would not be so much just how the results come out, but also whether you can convince people of the value you've added in the new results or the explanation of the results. And I think there maybe things have shifted a bit because there's always an interplay between theory and empirics, but I feel now that a lot of the emphasis has shifted very much over on the type of evidence that people accept, and that's often interpreted quite
And do you
narrowly.
feel that this is, has had a baleful effect on the sort of topics that people choose, that they're discouraged from pursuing interesting topics if they don't feel they'll be able to come away with a knockdown causal identification research design?
It's difficult to know what's the sort of potential research that people could do or what is left in the file drawer. But I do think that I do think that there are some negative effects. I think that's probably interesting. In the old days, people sometimes talk about pre-theory or findings in search of a theory and so on, and it was okay to publish articles that started thinking out loud. And that I think is very difficult to do now. And I also think another thing that we've lost out a little bit is the ongoing debates in research areas. So the bar now for publishing a comment on a published article has become very high. Most journals don't accept, well, they say they accept research notes, but a lot of times they don't. And it's very difficult to publish comments on an article unless something is spectacularly wrong. So I don't feel that we have like a strong space for this kind of debate about about research. But I appreciate also that journal space is limited, so it's perhaps inevitable that it would move that way given increase in submission and increasing rejection rates.
Right. Would you, you mentioned earlier that there's a certain sense in which once you've been in the field for a while, your one project leads to another. And so one is rarely in that space of, oh, what should I do now? Is that how you experience your kind of your life, that one thing leads to another? Or
yeah, I mean, I think that's generally true. And most of the research areas that I worked on have been like that. But I think also when you've been in the field for a while, you often have more than one research area that you're working on. And I suspect, at least in my case, it's often been the case that I've made like more progress on some things than others. And there may be some things that I've worked quite a bit on, but didn't have that much to show for it. So there could be like something that you invest a significant amount of time in that maybe doesn't translate into publications.
Do you feel that there is a lot in your file drawer, so to speak, that's worthwhile but may never see the light of day?
I have quite a few things in my file drawer, and I think they're there for two reasons. Some things are in there because although there are some interesting ideas there, I just haven't made that much progress that would justify this being published in a prominent place. And that could be because I just haven't managed to make so much progress on the explanation, or there could be ambiguities in the empirical analysis that make it more difficult to publish. And sometimes there may be things that you start out being excited about, but then the holes in your thinking become more apparent when you keep working on it. So I think that there are some parts that are solvable, and those papers I've never really entirely given up on, but sometimes it can take a long time before they're actually finished. And then there are other things that I will probably stay in the drawer because I'm no longer convinced that it's a worthwhile project to pursue. But having said that, I would say that I think that even if you find that something is not worthwhile to complete once you've started it, there probably was a value in starting it in the first place, because you could only come to those insights by actually having tried to
Right.
do something. So we can learn something even if
Right,
something is
and
considered a
that, of
failure.
course, is what is worrisome. That there's some important information contained in that file drawer that no one except you has access to, and so
Right. Yeah.
is your feeling that there are such projects that there just is no venue for these things because they don't have a quote unquote result.
Yeah, I think that that is true, and and like you say, since they're just in file drawers, they won't be in the public domain, and that means that no one else would have access
Yeah,
to
only the
knowing
Russian
that this was
hackers.
done, and someone actually had tried doing work on it. I think the only one of the few things I can remember along this line was there was a blog post by Chris Blattman where he blogged about a paper that he'd written, um, which he found no evidence for a proposition which he had expected to find support for, and he thought many others had too. Then he talked about how it was almost impossible to publish something like that, yet he thought that it would be helpful to have these results accessible,
Right.
so he just posted it on his
Yeah,
blog post.
and I guess the World Wide Web with its wonderful search engines does make that information potentially attainable.
Mm-hmm.
But as we know, not everyone
Yeah.
has a blog, and blogs aren't always maintained, and so it doesn't really serve as a useful repository. And most people would
Um, that's true, and also because of the way search algorithms work, they'll be ranked by popularity. So if something truly is
not
obscure,
exactly,
it will often be
exactly.
difficult
Yeah,
to find it.
I think I share your sense that we're losing a lot of information because of the regulatory strictures or criteria or whatever that are demanded of publication. So let me ask: Do you feel that your work is informed by a consistent theory or theoretical framework, or are you eclectic as you approach each problem?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think since a lot of the work that I do is cumulative, it's usually involved by some kind of core assumptions and ideas that move from one paper to another. Um, Now, when you say consistent, it may not be entirely consistent in the sense that there are things that could change along the way, and I actually think that that's an important thing. So if we eventually end up changing how we think about something, that could be evidence that we've learned something. Um, I I haven't done that so much in my own work, but I have sometimes tried to make notes on things that I used to think was true that I no longer think is true. Um, and when I feel depressed about the state of knowledge, I try to look at some of these things because I do think that um, sometimes there's a tendency that people say that their approaches are um, invariant and constant, and they never change their mind about anything. But even though I think that there's consistency in my work and there's certain sort of guiding assumptions and thoughts, I don't have like a very strict um, core theory that informs everything I do, or I don't think I have like a um, one bridging
Mm-hmm.
idea that unites everything that
Okay.
I do.
Um, do you see your work as being connected to who you are, to your personal biography, or is it more of an abstract intellect? Okay.
Sure. Um,
Sure.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to disconnect this. I think everyone is somewhat influenced by their origin, and so I suspect that the fact that I grew up outside the US and I lived in different countries, that probably influences how I see things and the kind of comparisons that I draw. And then I think the fact that I've studied in different countries probably gives me a somewhat different perspective on the culture, academia, and traditions. But then again, I think that most people probably have other parts in their biography that could influence their thinking. So my guess is that most academics probably carry a lot of influences, and that this ultimately influences their research.
Political science was, and to a large extent still is, a very U.S.-centered discipline. And are there ways in which you have a sense that you're a little bit of an outsider, or you see things differently, or how does that seem to you?
So I think political science in some ways has been very US centric, but I think that this has also been changing quite a bit, and it's been changing dramatically over the last 20 years or so. I think when I was a PhD student and in the 90s, then being based outside the US was definitely an anomaly in many professional settings. But I actually think that that's less the case now. So I feel in some sense less removed from the mainstream, in part because the discipline has become broader and more international.
That certainly rings true to me. Certainly with respect to Europe, I think other parts of the world are a little less integrated. But tell me about some stories of how you came up with projects. Are there any cases of spectacular serendipity where something happened very unexpectedly to put you, to give you an idea for a project or an opportunity to pursue?
I'm not sure if there's any particular serendipity per se, but I think a lot of times the research projects that I've done that have become more cited and more influential, I think I was able to capitalize on some kind of comparative advantage that I had. That could either be because of experiences or theoretical ideas or empirical tools or approaches. I'm not sure if they're completely serendipitous, but I think a lot of ultimate impact and success in research is probably down to people having a good sense of where their comparative advantage lie. And you're most likely to be successful doing what you can do better than others. And just the fact that other people have success doing a certain thing doesn't mean that your research would be better.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We have certain kind of natural aptitudes, and we have to build on what we have. For the most part, we can learn new tricks every now and again. But
yeah, and we have to, because the toolkit is evolving, and we have to sort of keep with the times. But no one can be an expert on everything, and therefore I think that's important to try to think about where you have the opportunities to make
and where would you see
the largest contribution.
How would you describe your comparative advantage?
My comparative advantage? I mean, I think when I started out as a political scientist, I think I benefited from having a bit more formal training in statistics. So I had some skills in programming and so on that other people might not have had at the time. But I don't think that that's my comparative advantage now, because there would be people that are better at all of these things now, and since times move, it would also be surprising if there weren't things that younger scholars didn't know more about than I did. So I think maybe now my comparative advantage now would be a little bit more in being able to think about things in an integrated manner, and being able to see how we could apply insights from one problem to another, drawing on research
Can
that
you
already had done.
offer an example of that sort of synthetic skill?
Yes, I think that some of the right. So some of the work that I've done on spatial IDs and diffusion and so on, that would then apply to conflict, they were easy to extend to other areas. So it informed my thinking about democratization. And likewise, I mean, there may be some evidence now that traditional types of organized violence is declining. But I think I may have some insight into understanding how that may translate to other types of less organized violence, such as terrorism and riots and so on. So sometimes by understanding one concept well, you can try to understand how another concept might differ, and that might give you an advantage in thinking about these topics.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so you've traveled around a little bit in terms of different topics and subfields and whatnot. But it sounds like in some respects you're asking similar questions and bringing similar tools to bear.
Yeah, I think that's generally true.
Do you see the traditional subfields as useful or as straitjackets?
Well, one of the experiences I had as a student was that subfields were defined very differently in different countries. So when I was an undergraduate in Norway, I always learned that there were 4 subfields of political science. There was international relations, political theory, comparative politics, and public administration. But then when I moved to the US, I discovered that public administration, which was the bread and butter of European political science at the time, that didn't really seem to exist in the US. And what I thought was called comparative politics now seemed to be called American politics. Whereas people that said they did comparative politics seemed to do area studies. And IR seemed to be split between people that did very traditional security studies and people that did very different types of sort of cross-national research. So I think that many of the subfields clearly have unclear boundaries. It's very unclear where the boundary would be between American and comparative politics, other than some arbitrary definition based on empirics. And then many of the topics that are studied in comparative in IR, it seems very arbitrary to define them as international comparative. So I don't think that the subfields are very well defined in that sense. But there probably are some differences in culture and tradition that have some permanence of the subfields.
Right. Well,
the subfields are likely to sort of predate the definition of their subject matter.
Well, they certainly are less. The subfields seem to be less distinct, with the possible exception of political theory, which still seems quite separate than they used to be. I mean, nowadays, I used to think about American politics as being, the most parochial of all area studies, but I don't think that's quite so true anymore. And
yeah, and also if you think about applications of theories from economics and so on. A lot of these things probably first appeared as application to American politics, and then they gravitated into comparative
from a certain
applications.
perspective, the commitment to different areas could be viewed as anti-theoretical. I mean, you don't see that in more theoretically oriented fields like economics and sociology.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's true. And also, it may well be that there are certain things that are very different about American politics than other countries. But if that's true, then you would at least expect the field to offer some kind of explanation of what that difference is. And I think that's relatively rare in political science. Sometimes people just start talking about Congress, but they don't say very much about the scope conditions of a theory, or but is this a theory only about American Congress, or is it a more general theory representation where certain features of American institutions
well, there is an
have
irony that for so long the notion of American exceptionalism was just taken for granted among Americanists. But if you really believe that, then you're not learning very much about the world by studying the U.S. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I think you're right that it's hard to think of other fields that have a similar type of distinction. Even in history is often very specialized, but I don't think that people would say define their subfield so that what other historians did was irrelevant to their work.
What sort of advice do you offer to your doctoral students when they're looking for dissertation topics, or when you are counseling junior faculty or friends, colleagues who are not sure what to focus on, their next big project?
Yeah, I'm not sure always if I'm the best person to give advice, but if I if I give advice, I usually try to tell people to try to identify what it is that they're really interested in. Because if you're going to work on a topic, that has to be something that is interesting to you. There's going to be enough challenges that if you're not really interested in something, then it will be more difficult to see it through. And then the other thing is what I already mentioned. I try to encourage them to think about what they might have some comparative advantage in doing. And then I try to instill some realism in the sense of that publications is very important. If you want to get a job, then having publications will be very important. It's also difficult to publish, and here are some of the challenges that you might encounter. And then try to offer advice, which I think will help them follow what they're interested in, but also make it easier for them to get a job and develop a career.
Do you think that the incentives that face young scholars are generally productive of good research, creative work, or does it lead them towards very... Go ahead.
So I think they generally are. I've never worked at the very top of elite institutions, yet all my students who wanted to find academic jobs have always been able to do so. And I think that is in part because we've moved towards more emphasis on publishing and record and less emphasis on lineage and hierarchy. But paradoxically, I think that there's a limit in the system to these kind of things, and that can only work if it's reasonably easy to publish work that is good, and we don't have too long publication lags. So I'm sometimes worried that if our acceptance rate goes down to, say, I believe the APSR now had an acceptance rate of 3.6%. then I think we move into dangerous territory, because do we really think we have an intersubjective agreement on what's the best 3.6% of political science research as opposed to the best 10%? And then we move into territory where some people get lucky and by scoring a publication, things would look very good, but it's not necessarily a good predictor of future performance. And where other people may come very close but have very little to show for it. I think in economics, there's some evidence of these things. So in economics, it's often common that people will go for a long time without a publication, and having been able to publish one thing doesn't necessarily say very much about your future trajectory. So I think we have a bit of a publication crisis on our hands, and that will be potentially more difficult for younger scholars. So that's not really a question of incentives, but I guess it's more a question of constraints.
When you look across the discipline at people you know who are extraordinarily productive, but also seem to have really interesting, creative ideas, they're able to think about things in new ways. What do you see as their Is there a secret sauce? Is there, what distinguishes these people from others who are not right there?
Yeah. Well, I suspect that the one thing that's common is probably some kind of combination of tenacity and discipline. So they're probably people who work hard and also people that are able to focus. But beyond that, I think it's difficult to see any one unifying thing, because people can be brilliant in many different ways. You have some people who are very good at identifying like the smallest publishable units, but are then very productive, and it adds up to a large and coherent program. And then you have other people that are more imaginative thinkers that maybe don't publish that much, but they manage to identify the key things that are incorrect in the conventional wisdom, and then spend a long time trying to figure out where the problems lie and what alternative explanations might consist of. So I think there's more than one way to be influential and creative.
I was just thinking of, are there studies that come to mind that really surprised you in the sense that they had a very different argument or a very different finding, something that you would not have predicted, that changed your view of a topic?
Yeah, so part of the problem with what counts as surprising is that a lot of times something is surprising to us until we see the explanation. And then if you find the explanation compelling, then right, we will say, oh, yeah, so that makes perfect sense. But yeah, I mean, I'm struggling to think of like a example of that, but I think maybe the closest I can get to it is that there have been some studies that when I read them, they made points that were very obvious once you understood them, but that I'd never really thought very much about. And I guess one explanation of that is something like Firon's article about rationalist theories of war. There are all these traditional security studies things that argue that, but they sort of argue that we don't have to explain war because the problem is all pervasive, and it's really peace that has to be explained. And this made the very simple argument that if we assume rational actors in the war is costly, then we need to explain why it is that you just can't come to an agreement and save the costs of fighting the war, especially if the observable things about power could be factored into that agreement. So when you say that, that makes perfect sense, and also it follows from standard theories of bargaining in economics, but it fundamentally changed the way that I thought of the problem. Not so much because there was something that I believed that was shown to be clearly wrong, but it simply pointed out a problem that
Right.
that most people have
There's
just
a statement
overlooked.
that philosophers of science often make about discovery, and that is that a discovery is already there. It's what the explorer, the discoverer, is merely pointing out something that's right in front of us. And that's why
that's a
kind
good
of
saying.
you forget that, oh, this was surprising when I first read it, and then it became common sense. Quickly became common sense.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to more empirical explanation, I think it's often the case that we expect that some kind of phenomenon will have these kind of effects. And then later on, when we find that it doesn't, then we might find that that's because there's some kind of other countervailing mechanism that we didn't take into account, which sort of counterbalances the other expectation. I think there are many cases like that. I just struggle to think of a particular example.
I'm thinking about the the well-known phenomenon that if you ask people who they voted for after an election, more people say they voted for the winner than the loser, and there's a certain kind of like in order to really track progress, one would have to have a panel survey where you ask people what they thought about different subjects at regular intervals.
Sure, that's true. I mean, this comes out very clearly in the work that Tetlock did. So he has an article which is called I was wrong, but I was almost right. And he would point to that if you confront people with their predictions, they would usually say that their theory was right in principle, but there was some kind of other exogenous event or force that happened that invalidated their prediction.
Right. Okay, so here's here's my last question. Are there areas of political science that we're really missing, that are ripe for discovery or rediscovery? You know, where's the uncharted territory? Where are the things that are right in front of us that we're not seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone had answered that question, then they would also have a head start on research on that. I think it's difficult to say. I think there could be certain areas that seem like that seem like an interesting areas until someone has some kind of insight that leads to discovery and rejuvenates a field. But knowing where that is ahead of time, I think, is a difficult task.
Right. Well, good. Are there any questions I should have asked? Anything I'm glossing over or missing in this interview?
Well, I mean, it covers quite a large field, but I can't think of any particular things that I wanted to add. But I'd be interesting to know what other people think, and I think.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your thoughts, and let's stay in touch.